are listening to Setting History Straight with Linda Watson on Hebrew Nation Radio.
We're going to talk about this line of Nimrod. And it's going to be amazing because this thing just going to unfold like you're not going to believe. There was a line, just like Dan has talked about how there's a line that goes from Abraham and even before that all the way through until today. Well, there's a line for Nimrod that's exactly like that, and it's associated with ancient Assyria, and we're going to see that. Now, this is ancient Assyria that we have a map of right here. I want to talk about Nimrod in history first. You know, this is what the encyclopedias tell us. They say that everything about Ninus was his name in history, Ninus, okay? And they don't believe he existed. But they have a picture of him on a symbol, and they have a picture of him on a coin. So if he didn't exist, why is he on the coins, and why do they have a symbol of him? This is what Nimrod looked like. If you look over here on the side, this is what he actually looked like. And the historians, they really truly don't believe in this history. They said, well, it's because it's not written in the actual tablets in that time frame. We don't believe that he actually existed. Well, he had different other names. He was called Merkur. He was called Osiris. In Egypt, he was called Osiris, and Semiramis was called Isis. They had different names. So these historians know this. This is something that they've left out because they can see the connection to the Bible, I believe. Now, this is the actual history that they give you. It says the figures of King Ninus and Queen Semiramis. Well, we know Semiramis, who she is. She's even talked about in the Bible. First appeared in history in Persia. Now, Tetius was that historian that wrote, he actually was a doctor. He was a physician to Artaxerxes II. Now, Artaxerxes would have been the one that was married to Esther. He would have been the one that was married to Esther. And this is the history that came out of the Persian Empire, which Persia would have been closely, they would have a lot of this ancient history. So for historians to bypass this and say it's not accurate, it's hard for me to understand that. Now, Diodorus, who wrote in the 1st century, wrote about him. And now even Alfred the Great, which we know lived in the 8th century in England, he wrote about him. So you had many people that wrote about him. Now, what they said was this, that he was the son of Baal, B-E-L. And Baal would have been the god that they worshipped, at that time. And his father would have been Kush. That's who his father was. So that Baal would have represented Kush. This is what we can summarize from this. His reign lasted for 52 years. And he lived somewhere around 2189 BC. So they know a lot about him for a person who's supposed to be a legend. Okay. Now, it talks about his conquests, and they even mention that in some of the history books too. So you have at least 4 history books and 4 writers that wrote about him that we know of, and they still don't believe he existed. Now let's go to his genealogy. Genesis 10, verse 8, and Kush begat Nimrod. He became a mighty one in the earth. And, he was a mighty hunter, where it is said, even as Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord. And it says, in the beginning of his kingdom was Babel, which we know is, that's where the Tower of Babel was, right? Erech, Arcade, and Calais, and the land of Shinar, which the land of Shinar was the old land of Babylon. Now, it talks about them in history that they are going to be wiped out in Micah 5 verse 6. But for right now, we're just going to concentrate on what this history looks like. This would have been his territory right here. This was his beginning territory that we talk about. It's in Babylon, and you can see it's in between the two rivers, Euphrates. And here we go. You see the same cities. You can see some of the same cities with the names on them today. These would be the same cities that he captured and was the first actual kingdom that we know of in existence. He was the first one to establish a kingdom. So again, the historians tell you, and here's again another Roman historian said that he was actually Zoroaster, and then Ninus was first identified by the part of the Clemen literature with biblical Nimrod, so they associating him with Nimrod. There you go again. And it's very interesting because for people that are saying that there's no history around this man, there sure is a lot of history, okay? So this is his territory. This is where they believed the areas that he conquered, which would have been a big piece of that part that we consider the Middle East, more toward Afghanistan, all the way to India. So he had a large territory that he conquered. And, you know, going back to Kush would have been his father. The sons of Ham, Ham had 4 sons, Kush, Mesrom, Put, and Cana. And then here's the sons of, in verse 7, here is all the sons of Kush. But then it has a separate line that talks about Kush beget Nimrod. And so he was the one that really, the first development of an empire that we would consider an empire. And that would began that beast power that's talked about in the book of Revelations. It really would have began that beast power. Now, I want to show you this symbol. This is the symbol that was dug up from old ancient Assyria. And you can see it has a double head. Do y'all all see this? Okay, and it tells you where it was found and who found it. And it was actually in the gate in the eastern part. This would have been found in the land of Assyria. It's an old ancient symbol, which ties them back to the symbol of the double-headed eagle. Now, here's another relic that they dug up. You can see the double-headed eagle here. And then going on, this is the Habsburg dynasty. Now, remember, we talked about the Habsburgs. We talked about that line of the Habsburgs, and we talked about that in the history session that we did last week. If y'all haven't heard that, go back and listen to that, because I went through all the history of these Habsburgs and how they were part of they were the actual persecuting piece in the Protestant Reformation. Those were the guys that persecuted the Christians. They were Catholic, and they persecuted the Christians who were Protestant. This is the same symbol. Do y'all see that's a double-headed eagle? You know, now here's Charles V of the Roman Empire, and look what he has. He has a double-headed eagle. And so do y'all begin to see that this line is associated with Babylon, with old ancient Egypt, and even the Hittites? I didn't show the picture for the Hittites, but the Hittites had the symbol of the double-headed eagle. And the reason they're so important is that's the line that Esau married into. Esau married 2 princesses from the line of the Hittites. And Hittites would have been located in that same region that we're talking about. You know, so here we go. We have the double-headed eagle there. Now here's the coat of arms for the Byzantine Empire. Now remember, first you had Rome in the Western world. It would fall, and it was Romulus Augustus would have been its last emperor. They would fall to the Visigoths, which were the people that came out of Scythia as a Germanic tribe. Remember, they would have been probably the tribes of Israel. We were pretty confident of that. And they took down the Roman Empire in 410. And the Roman Empire then shifted to the Byzantine Empire, which was around Constantinople. But look at their symbol. They have the double-headed eagle also. Now, here's Russia's symbol. This is Russia's coat of arms. Do y'all see this? Do you see that the Russian coat of arms also has a double-headed eagle? But it also has something else very interesting in it. It has a white horse, and I don't know if you can see it, he is actually holding some kind of bow in his hand. And so, I mean, man, you don't get any more specific than that. You don't get any more specific than that. A white horse, are you kidding me? That's coming right out of the book of Revelations. So, I mean, I just think it's so interesting, but they have the double-headed eagle also. You remember that we've talked about this before, that Zeno was called the Zeno the Edomite. He married in the princess of the Byzantine Empire. His son sat on the throne, he sat on the throne, and eventually that line would fall to the Ottoman Turks. Then the niece of Constantius, which was the last emperor in the Byzantine Empire, he was the 11th. How interesting is the number 11? Because 11 means judgment. His niece, who was named Zoe, would marry the Tsar of Russia. And that Tsar of Russia is how this line got into Russia. But there's more history around Russia in this whole thing. Now, the Assyrian history, we know the Assyrian Empire fell in 612 BC. One of the reasons it fell, that you remember that Shalmaneser went to fight the Jews. He went to fight Judah. And when he did, the father struck his entire army and destroyed it. And there was only him and a couple of people left. Out of all that military army, everybody was struck down. So his empire was weakened. And when he came back home, his sons killed him because of what had transpired. It left them in a weakened state, and they would fall in 612. And they actually migrated, and history tells you, I want to read this very carefully so y'all can hear this. They actually migrated above the Black Sea. Now watch this. Phinis, located in Assyria north of the Black Sea in his day, the 1st century AD. He's saying, he's actually telling them that that's where Assyria is located, north of the Black Sea in his day. Now that would be Phinis the Elder. Now that's a historian. Now, a few hundred years later, Jerome lived in the 4th century. Now, Jerome would have been the person who wrote the Catholic Bible, which was the Vulgate, if you remember. Now, he said the Ashura also joined with them. All right, now, so let me read this whole thing. He says that Psalms 83, verse 8, to the Germanic tribes invaded Western Europe along the Rhine, for Ashura or Assyria also is joined with them. So he's telling you that he knew that the Germanic tribes were the Israelite tribes and that the Assyrians were with them. Now, if you look at today, I believe that they're located in the area of Austria, Germany area. They are together. It's hard to tell which ones are Assyrians and which ones are Germans. So they are together. Smith's Bible dictionary says there can be no doubt that they migrated into Europe from the Caucasus and the countries around the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. And that's Germania, page 361. So these guys know where they went. You have at least 3 historians here saying they all migrated above the Black Sea. which is the same area that we know the Israelites went into. So scripture tells you in Psalms 83 that the Assyrians would be with Israel. They would be with Israel. That makes perfect sense if you notice what happened in World War I and World War II. So going on here, the Habsburgs, this is the actual history of the Habsburgs. Now, the Habsburgs would have been the actual ruling dynasty during the Protestant Reformation. They were the ones that persecuted the saints from the 12th century all the way down to the 17th century. That's 500 years they persecuted the saints. That goes back to Numbers 24, which says, who can survive this thing when I do it? And that's what the Father's saying. Who can survive this thing? That there's going to be a destruction in Eber, which was Spain, and a destruction in Ashura, which would have been Austria, Germany area, which he's talking specifically about the Protestant Reformation there. The first Habsburg comes, and Rebot of Kush, who was born in the 10th century. His family originated out of the Habsburg Castle in Switzerland. In 1279, the Habsburgs came to rule the dynasty of Austria. They ruled Austria. Austria and Switzerland are very close together in location, which was part of the Kingdom of Germany within the Holy Roman Empire. So King Ruford of Germany, of the Habsburg family, assigned the Duchess of Austria to his sons in 1282, and he established the Austrian inherited lands. And at that moment, the Habsburg dynasty was also known as the House of Austria. Now, between 1438 and 1806, they were ruled by the Archduke of Austria, which was elected the Holy Roman Emperor. Actually, the very first Holy Roman Emperor would have been Maximilian. That would have been in 1493, a year after Columbus sailed to America. He became the first Holy Roman Emperor in the Habsburg family. I think this is absolutely the line that goes down into Assyria. I think this is the line that goes into Assyria, and these people are going to be linked to Russia. There's no doubt that it's linking some of these people to Russia. Now, I tell you, this empire went all the way down to the Second World War and the First World War. The two people that were assassinated, King Ferdinand, he was the Holy Roman Emperor at that time. And he was assassinated, if you remember that story. And that's what started the World War. That was the catalyst. It started out of Austria. And, Hitler came in, and he had a similar symbol on his coat of arms also. Hitler came in, and he came out of Austria. There's no doubt who these people are. Now, all right, so Exodus 17, verse 14. And this is the story, if you remember the story in history about how Moses and Joshua fought the Amalekite. Amalek was the king, if you remember. Well, he actually was the descendant from a concubine from the descendants of Esau. That's where he came from. Okay, so this is who Joshua and Moses were fighting. And remember, they had to hold Moses's arms up. So because as long as his arms were held up, they would win the war. If they didn't have his arms up, when his arms went down, the Amalekites would win the war. And so at the end of this war, he made a prophecy, Moses did, and I want to read this. And the Lord said unto Moses, write this as a memorial in the book. Rehearse it in your ears to Joshua. In other words, tell everybody, for I utterly will put in remembrance of Amalekites from under heaven. Now watch. Now Moses built an altar and called the name of it Jehovah Nessi. And he said, because the Lord has sworn that the Lord will have war with the Amalekites from generation to generation. The Israelites would have war with Esau's descendants. He said every generation they would have a war with Esau's descendants. And that was a prophecy given. So see, Esau married into that same line that we're talking about here. He married into the Hittites, which were part of this empire that we called Assyria. Many people don't realize that. And so the Amalekites, that would have been that same line that Esau was married into. So, you know, this was a prophecy saying that Israel would always go to war with these people. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about Ezekiel 38, verse 1. And we're going to start, let's start in verse 2. It says, "Oh, son of man, set your face against Gog, the land of Magog, the prince of Rosh." And then it mentions all the other nations that come up, Meshech, Tubal. You go through this list. You see Persia in here in verse 5. You see Kush in here. You see Put in here. You see Gomer. Gomer is tied back to Korea. Korea is the homeland for Japan. So here we go. And then to Gomer, it tells you is in the northern parts. That is the people in the northern parts. That's Siberia, China. Do y'all see that? And so it's identifying the people that comes against the unwalled cities of Israel. The definition, we're going to talk about the definition of Rosh and who is it? R-O-S-H. That has been taken out in most translations. Most of your translations of your Bible have taken out the word Rosh. It's amazing. They just do these things and, you know, and it just makes me crazy, but they do these things. Now, here's the Imperial Dictionary. This is actually a dictionary, comes from Russia. Evidence exists in the ancient people called the Rosh, supposed to be the original stem from Russia, and modern Russians devised their race and their name. So it's telling you that's where their name comes from, Russia. And that it comes from this group of people that were the original settlers there called Rosh. So it's no doubt. And then it goes on and talks some more about Tubal and each one of these nations that are mentioned. They're actually mentioned in the Assyrian records as Mashi, Mashai, and Tubal, and Tubali. And so here we go. These guys are mentioned everywhere in history. So now getting to this early history, this is the earliest history of Russia. The history of Russia goes back to the Eastern Slavic people, which would have been in that region we talk about. Some of those tribes would have been Slavic. They are, I believe that they are the other sons of Shem, because they are white, but they're not blessed, because Israel's line through Abraham was the blessed line. That would have gone through the line of Ephraim, if y'all remember. And so they're the blessed line. So these are basically white people, okay, that live in that area. They're Eastern Slavic people. That's what it tells you. Those would be the original ones. They would be called the White Russians in history. Now you don't hardly even see that word. Now it says the traditional start date, a specified Russian history, is in the state of Rush state in the north in 862, ruled by the Varanians. Now the Varanians were Nordic people. They would have came out of the area of Sweden. They would have came out of the area of Norway. Now, Stephen Collins gives this history, and he talks about how some of those people that came out of Sweden, Norway, pushed themselves into Russia and they ruled Russia. And this would have been in the 8th century. Now, the Rosh people, they were early medieval Europe. They came out of basically Europe. And notice they originated from Sweden. They settled routes around the Baltic and the Black Sea from around the 8th century to the 11th century. And they formed a state known as the Kiva Russia. This is where Russia got its name. Kiev is one of the in Russia. So, you know, this history is just amazing to me because, you know, you see all these people, you can identify these people. See, these probably would have been Vikings. This probably would have been some of the people that we consider the Vikings moved into that area to rule Russia. I mean, and the history on that, when Stephen Collins teaches it, he goes into more detail and he says that actually that Russia was in such a state of disarray that they asked the Vikings to come in and rule their country. And that's what, you know, that's what basically I think probably transpired. Now, we see this verse in Isaiah chapter 10, verse 5, and said, Ho, Assyria, the rod of my anger, the staff in whose hand is my indignation. See, it was actually a line. I believe it was a line that started with Nimrod. And I think I tried to build the case today to show you that it went all the way from Nimrod, all the way up into the empire, into, of course, Assyria first, then into the Roman Empire, then it would have come into the Byzantine Empire, and from there it would have connected into Russia today. And that's how you can identify who is actually going to come against America. Now, with that information, we're going to go ahead and close this out.